Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's Sunday, November the 6th, the 22nd year of the year 2000. This is the Brain Steep podcast with your host, Noah, aka N Direction, and my co-host. Take it away, Matt.
Yep. I don't have a cool other name. I'm War Knife and all these things, but that's because I made that name when I was 9 years old playing Warcraft 3, so it's not really that great of an
I gotta
origin
mention
story.
my pseudonym. I gotta mention my pseudonym in case I ever just decide that I'm only gonna go by my pseudonym, and then people for posterity will know. And then if I get rid of my pseudonym, my children are gonna be like, "Why do you keep saying Indirection? There's no record of whatever this is."
This podcast will have to delete it in case that happens. Okay.
Yeah. Cool. So right now we're keeping the Brain Steep name, but with a different flavor, different tea. Last time was white tea. This is maybe more of a black tea or a green tea. I would say maybe chamomile. It might put you to sleep if you're not interested in philosophy or if you don't like being delivered wisdom directly to your noggin. This might put you to sleep.
It's 50 cc's.
Yeah. So so I think that generally this podcast, we're going to talk about the idea of the podcast and where the basis is and some of the ideas we're going to be playing with. But in general, I kind of like this idea that, as you learn things, as you go through life and learn life lessons and wisdom about, the human experience, it can be really helpful to kind of reference back to the things you used to know, and then tying together, the things that you learned with the things that you knew and revising what you knew before, and combining different pieces of information together to form new ideas. And so I thought, what better to do that than through a map? And so we're going to kind of talk about maps of knowledge and the idea of knowledge systems and, it's epistemology in general, the theory of knowledge, how people come to know things, and how we can, is there any value in building some core value and belief system? This is the idea.
That's pretty interesting. To the metaphysics or thinking about thinking pieces of it. I had a bunch of things written about how people pass knowledge on. Is that maybe the classic ways that people pass knowledge on, instead of oh, here's a knowledge map that I wrote, out
yeah,
for you,
no, that's
right?
actually a great place to start, is generally how people typically pass knowledge on.
Yeah, I really like the idea of we could get into religion. That's probably the biggest category before or after, I guess, the I think is the most primal thing, which is a story, right? That's the form of knowledge transfer that predates probably every written form that we know of, right? You're walking in the woods, you hear a sound, or you came upon this big creature, all those sorts of, archetypes. I guess we could use the right technical term. I think it's pretty clear that, at least to me, that all religions descend from this text or setup. There's some story that represents something greater than one person that is worth retelling. It's not oh yeah, my friend Jim, he went for a pack of cigarettes and he hit a cat with his car. That's a terror. What is the point? Why are you telling me the story? There's reasons things work their way into literature and religion, right?
Yeah, I have an interesting idea about that, because I kind of have this way of thinking that I've come to, where it's we have things that we've condensed down to words and language. The example word I can think of is consciousness, right? How long did it take humanity to boil down that into a word that you can just learn what the word means, and then we kind of understand each other when I say consciousness, you're conscious of that, or you have just in general, consciousness is it's the idea of experience, that you have an experience, you have I think we used to call it conscious observer when we used to podcast before, but I think that I realized that I was making up a word for something that we already have a word for, which is consciousness.
Yeah.
That's already the thing that I'm trying to say. does something have consciousness is the same thing of what we were saying before. Like, does it have a conscious observer? But back to what you were saying, where it's like, we have now the word for consciousness. And so we can pass that down. We can teach our children
Right.
what that word means. And they can start from a very useful tool to describe something and communicate with each other. But I think before we have a word for something, the best you can do is tell a story, right?
Right.
Or the best thing you can do to communicate the idea is telling a metaphor, because you don't quite have the concrete language to communicate that idea.
Yeah. Like I love like words that are just the names of people from stories. Like narcissism is like one of my favorite words, because if you look at the etymology, it's the name of a guy who
Oh, wow.
it's a Greek story, right?
Narcissus, is that right?
Yeah, Narcissus. So he, and there's also like a flower, I think, named the same. It's a very pretty flower, but it's a man that was so in love with himself that I think the way he comes about his like untimely demise is that he falls into a pool of water and drowns because it's a reflection of himself. And so he just stares at that. Like,
wow.
that shows, you
That's
you
deep.
love yourself so much that you are either, I can't remember if he dies from it or if he's just gets wet. I mean, hopefully he can swim or something, but it's a Greek story, so it probably ends tragically.
Probably dies.
Yeah, he's probably dead. But like, yeah, those sorts of etymologies to me are like really cool because they characterize what you're talking about, like narcissism as a concept. People understood that before the word of the story existed, but probably the way they conveyed it was some other story of a guy who loved himself or a woman who loved herself so much that they were all consumed with their own identity, things that they could do. It's going back to consciousness. It does look like it's around 1600 that word came into existence in English, but it's I just looked up online etymology dictionary, one of my favorites. It comes Latin conscious. I didn't pronounce it probably, but knowing, aware, consciere, be mutually aware, with like with or thoroughly, then sciere, to know, like science. And then it probably comes from alone, from the Greek, but I don't know, in the Greek word synedos, I don't know if that word, how old that is, if it's like ancient Greek or if it's more modern. It's interesting to think that the Greeks and the Romans would have had some word that approximated it. Didn't necessarily have the exact, wouldn't have had the same psychological meaning though. I don't think they thought of people that way thousands of years ago.
Well, maybe they did though, because I mean they have the word, and the word, I think, is the knowledge. And a lot of what's your thought on that? Because that's something I believe, like, that sometimes people will say this, where like you don't actually understand something until you have like the words to describe it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like there's that pyramid of knowledge, I think, like, or of learning, and like the top of the pyramid is teaching. Like, something when you can, and for words, right? Like you can say the word is essentially your version of teaching it. Like I can speak narcissism and I know that means like some crazy amount of self-love. But if I just hear it, I probably don't know it. And if I hear it enough times, maybe I have an inkling of what it means, especially if there's some context around it.
Yeah.
So I totally agree.
I don't know if I believe that. I mean, the way I view knowledge is like, I think it's an Einstein quote, but I don't want to make myself look stupid. But he talks about how like science is like shining a light in the darkness, and as you grow the size of that light, and we shine more light on things that we don't know, the sphere around that we don't know just grows larger. It's almost like, so like you get like the circumference of the light. If you imagine like a flashlight, as that grows wider, you have a wider circumference of knowledge you don't know. And the way I kind of think about that is like, what's inside the light is the things that we don't have knowledge of yet. Or no, sorry. What's inside the light is the things that we have knowledge of. Sorry. We have the words to describe that. But that's not your only tool to understand what's in the darkness, right? Maybe you have to shine the light in one area because that's like, that's what we understand. But then maybe you could reach into the darkness beyond what you're not seeing and touch something and feel it and know it's there. And you might even know and understand things about it, like it's hot to the touch, or it's cold to the touch, or it's sharp, or it's soft, or it's breathing, or you hear it in the darkness. These you can piece together a lot of things without using your sense of sight.
Right.
And I think that's kind of like what in my mind, like what metaphor is, or what myth are for, is that like there are things that we know are there. Like you can touch them, you can feel them or smell them and hear them, but you don't necessarily have the exact words to articulate it. So you tell a story instead. I would even go beyond that and go into like the realm of like it's kind of even at the level of like unconscious. Like you understand and believe something to be true unconsciously, and bringing it into your conscious mind and articulating it is more or less like an exercise for your left brain to organize your thoughts, versus like the thoughts are already fully there in my mind. Like I think you internalize it unconsciously and experience that truth unconsciously first, and then you find the words to bring it into like conscious thought. Like I don't think it's the other way around, because that's what I was just saying, right? Like is it that you don't understand something until you have the words to describe it? I actually think it's the backwards. I think you always understand things before you can put them into words.
I think you could come about it another way, though. But I guess it's a question of what understand means. And from you, I think, where did I think I'd learned the etymology for understand as like being in something, like, standing in the middle of. And in that sense, probably the path that you're talking about makes more sense. You're not outside explaining it. You're not doing it observationally. You're doing it from like, oh, I'm like within whatever this knowledge is, and I can speak to it or not even speak to it, but I can, I guess like that, steep your brain in it. But you're able to wrap your head around it, I guess is the other way of saying it, that people that might be like the more right brain side, like it's it's also visual, right? The part of your brain that sees things through pictures and imagery, and not through words, not through something so concrete or cold.
I think this also, I think that where I kind of get that from is also another reason why we're doing this sort of map, is like, and it's that I have this, I don't remember who was saying this, but I remember them saying like, where do your thoughts come from? Like do they come from active thinking? Well, I'm thinking like, if you look at it purely and not like a scientific point of view, but like an experiential, an experiential point of view, where it's like, are the experience of thinking and coming up with ideas, are you like logically stepping through known facts and piecing like, oh, I'm gonna write a story, let's see, well, the hero's myth is a good thing to start from, and you like just purely logically build everything out, and all of your ideas came out of like piecing together known facts? Or is it like you kind of just sit there and you kind of clear your mind, and then an idea will come to you, and that thought will come to you rather than come from you? I know Sam Harris talks about this.
Coming to you versus from you.
He talks about how like basically you're kind of, when you're speaking, like when I'm speaking right now, there is like definitely there's going to be consistency to what I'm saying, but I'm not holding everything in my brain first as it's like as the genesis of what I'm going to say and then processing it into speech. It's more like I've kind of just opened up my mouth, and what is coming into my brain is just coming out of my mouth. And like and this is kind of like back to the whole thing where it's like understanding things before you can fully articulate them. It's like a lot of the times your ideas are not coming from a place of conscious thought. They're coming to your conscious mind, and then your conscious mind is maybe, filtering what you then say afterwards. But the knowledge comes from like an unconscious place, I think.
I also wonder, well, I think we also use the term conscious and unconscious. I mean, let me go back to the etymology so I have it right. Like, of knowing, like, I think to know something versus to understand something, I really do feel like that's like a left brain versus right brain distinction. Like it's really easy to see with things like Summer, like the 1-year-old that I I have is like she can understand things, but would I say she knows them? No, because she doesn't formulate speech. She can't articulate it. But for example, she did something earlier, like she was throwing something, and we were like, no, don't throw it. And she just shook her head like back and forth. No, but she didn't say no. So that to me, I was like, she understands that something's not correct, and she can mimic a behavior that represents that.
Yeah.
But she can't formulate the speech to represent, oh, I think that's a no. And I think a lot of animals, I think that is like the distinguishing quality between like human thought and animal thought, is that animals, I think, mostly act in an understanding sense and not in a knowledge sense. Like they're like dogs. Like you can direct a dog to do things. They know, in quotes, know a handful of words, but really they understand those words. The dog's not going to speak back to you and say sit back to you or say yes. They don't work that way. They basically respond by doing the action that you want them to do, demonstrating that they understand. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess in a way, back to you were talking about your daughter not having the words to communicate it. Right. She kind of understood loosely, but you wouldn't say she knows.
Right.
For me, it's like, it's less that, I don't see it less as like knowledge as it is like words and language are a tool for understanding somebody else and what they want and what they're trying to communicate and what they want from in their life and what they want from you.
Sure.
Is mostly like, and even if you're talking about like less of like that kind of layer, but like more even science, you know, if we agree, how do we agree on a certain scientific fact? It's like, well, you have to have the language in order for us to agree on something. But I would say when it comes down to like, what do you as a person know? I would say that's not linguistic. I would say that what you know has to be, it's almost like if you think about software, because we're both software engineers, that like, you know, the language is the Java code or the Python code that you're writing. But what's actually done by the machine, what's actually run by the machine is bytecode. It's, you know, it's machine code or machine language, right? That's it's not like it's compiled to what the machine can understand. The language of Java or Python isn't the thing itself, I guess.
Yeah, it's a higher layer of abstraction.
It's a higher layer of abstraction.
For sure.
That would be a very good example of like what I think to be, you know, the knowledge that your machine has is encoded into bytes on a hard drive, and that's what it knows. But interpreting that requires like language. I guess maybe that's the point where like maybe your knowledge in your brain isn't organized or useful until you pass it through the layer of language, interpreted language. That could be another thing too. But, I mean, if we look at like other species of and everything, like the ones that don't have language, I think they exist at like a lower level of mental capacity just because they can't. But see, I don't know if that's just because they can't communicate with one another. They can't organize. That's the thing.
That I think is this is what's interesting too, is I think that language we always think of as verbal, but I think the most advanced creatures by social associations are basically certain primates, because they have some form of, if not verbal, then they have some sort of like shrugging or gesturing communication that they can do. Right. Or insects, like the best to go swing the other way, like ants and bees are great examples. I think of it extremely intelligent as a collective, maybe not individually considered intelligent. Like you can't pick a bee out and get the bee to do what you would consider an intelligent act, but what a colony can do is super intelligent from the perspective of an individual insect. Like you compare them against a spider, pretty smart, can spin a web and catch some bugs, but a bee colony, you know, we're talking thousands or tens of thousands or however many they can build up and support through this pretty complicated system of provisioning food, finding new territory, doing things that are unbelievably social. I mean, there's all these asexual, they cannot reproduce creatures as part of these colonies, that their whole job is to support this group that all they can do is breed. They can't do anything else. It's a pretty, I think the like markers of success from human perspective is like, how good at cooperation are you? And that's, like you said, language is the tool for cooperation, but it also is like, what is the point, at least for me, like, what is the point of knowledge or knowledge systems? I view people say like biological essentialist. I think of myself probably as that a lot of the time, but like the reason it matters that humans obtain knowledge and we're able to wield it like the tool that it is to do certain things, like create giant societies or complex societies or new technologies, is it preserved their germlines. I mean, the groups that didn't, this is like in which I'm going off a few tangents here, so I'll end with this one.
That's okay. No, I'm following.
The third chimpanzee is a Jared Diamond book. He's the guy that also wrote Guns, Germs, and Steel. And he's like, why are we different than the other two chimpanzees? Like, what really is the thing that matters about language? And then he also lifts it up a level. Well, what matters? Why isn't all of Earth just inhabited by hunter-gatherer? Like, why do farming populations start displacing? And it actually isn't quality of life that's always touted. It's like, oh, you can live better when you have farming, but early stage farming sucks. Like, you work a lot more than a hunter-gatherer does, and you still starve when there's famine because you're stuck to your plot of land. You can't just move somewhere and go hunt something else. But I think it comes down to, preserving the germline. What does happen is that it's very easy as a leader of those societies to build up this enormous base population that supports a very professional army or, intelligence arm, like, some sort of science or innovation arm. You can't support that while you're a hunter-gatherer population. You just don't have enough people that you can support at that level. And so to me, knowledge is like a huge puzzle piece to the problem of like, how do you build a very complex, large society, be it human or ant? Knowledge is like the key piece that's missing.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't dismiss that out of hand for sure. The ability to preserve your germline and organize so that like everything in your species continues to grow and prosper is, like, from a biological perspective, accurate. But I do feel like there's more to life than just surviving, and there's more life than just procreating. Like, I think a lot of our life is spent like searching for meaning, and a lot of that is kind of like, what is meaning? I would say my stance would more be like, knowledge helps you understand how to live a good life. But I do feel like what it means to live a good life is determined at the individual level. Like, it's on the person by person basis. I think each person has a responsibility to figure out what a good life would be. I also feel like they kind of intuitively know what that means. But that's different from like, and I would say that's what separates us from the other chimpanzees, is that they don't even understand what that means to live a good life. They just survive.
Yeah, they're very procreation focused. Like, they compare, it's pretty nasty, but they compare like the amount of times that they procreate and how much semen they release. It's pretty good. It's good to know as far as like a point of comparison. Chimpanzees and bonobos is the other. There's bonobos, chimpanzees, and pygmy chimpanzees.
Sounds like becoming helpful if you're trying to make some sort of weird bet.
Yeah, exactly. But it just shows that they have their social dynamics are very different. Chimpanzees are, for the most part, not monogamous. They're polygamous, where you have one main chimpanzee that's the biggest one of a group. They're not like apes, where it's like there's really just one. There's like it's like alpha-ish. Like, there's basically a constant fight for the top in chimpanzees from the ones that they've studied. But their germline stuff, I think, is very primitive compared with human germline dynamics, mostly because humans are much more monogamous. So you can make this argument, but then also you look at human societies, and most people, I have to be clear, most females end up procreating. It's like 80%. Males do not, though. So I don't know what the number is, but it's not 80%. And I guess that's where the interesting part of human population dynamics comes in. And then, like you said, living the good life, you could also argue the other way. Like, some of the people that have the best germlines in terms of the most descendants don't live the good life. Like, they're Genghis Khan or Charlemagne or some sort of conqueror that basically kills and rapes and pillages, but they accomplish one without procreation goal. But that's not, like you said, there's many other goals and ways to live a good life. Well, I wouldn't consider that a good life anyway.
I think that if you end up, I think that's actually the counterpoint to what you were saying is the Genghis Khan is like, why is Genghis Khan a bad thing? Isn't that a good thing? Like like from a biological stance, he did the right thing.
Yeah, from my perspective, he isn't a good or a bad thing. He is like an entity, like he wants to make more of himself, and his knowledge, which I think is a type of knowledge that is downplayed a lot, was a knowledge on how to kill people, right, and be the best at that. I mean,
I would agree with you in that he's an entity, and whether or not what he did is good and bad is up for the individual to determine. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Not that I don't think that I don't think that truth is subjective. Or yeah, no, that is right. Yeah, I don't think that truth and good and evil and morality is subjective. I just feel like we can only guess at what the true morality and the true, difference between right and wrong is.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And I think that for that reason, like, you have to figure it out for yourself. Whatever seemed consistent to you as like what is right and wrong, I think you have to trust that. That's kind of like what we were saying before, where it's like your knowledge of things and your understanding lives at an unconscious layer. It's something that's like completely opaque to you. And I think that most people, barring some like neurological disorder, can determine that, oh, what should you be doing? And they'd be like, oh, well, I should eat less, fatty foods and fried foods because I want to live longer. And then you'd be like, well, why do you want to live longer? And they'd be like, well, because I have kids and I have a family and I want to be there for them. And I'm the one that's supposed to support them. So if I die in 10 years versus 30, that's actually going to mean a significant thing to my family. That they might not be able to articulate it to that length, but maybe they have 10% of that. I should eat better, right? Like they might know that. Like they might and they might even know what better means, but maybe they know it when they're walking down the aisle of a store. They're like, should I grab a vegetable? Should I grab a can of, pre-made food? Like they might know some of it. And like, you do need to rely on science for certain things, but like, I think where science comes in is like, it's helping you sort out, it's providing you with a framework to think that is consistent, where you might not be using a consistent way of thinking or a consistent logic system, which does bring us back to like, what's the point of doing something like building a consistent system of knowledge or logical system of thinking to organize your thoughts? Do we even need something like that? Is that something we already do in other ways?
Right.
And how do other systems work?
Yeah, I really liked whenever I think of like a consistent knowledge system, I guess they do take the scientific bent, but I think the religious bent, they have the same problem, which is where do you start? Like, what's your, and the best word that I know to use a word to represent what I understand is like axioms or axiomatic systems.
Axiomatic systems are good.
Yeah, because I remember learning that in math class and thinking, oh, wow, it took me, I was like in college, I was like 19 or 20. It's like, it took me this long to learn the fact that, zero as a concept is not a given in your system. Or I learned in geometry in high school, or probably even in middle school, the same concept of like two parallel lines never meet. It's like, well, that's true in Euclidean geometry, but this type of geometry, which you get with a different, starting set of axioms, and I didn't define it.
Yeah, well, it's only exists if like
they cross.
If your x and y axis are 90 degrees, like are perpendicular.
Yeah.
Too, right? You could make a geometric system where they're not perpendicular.
Surface of the Earth, right? You get two parallel lines do meet. Because it's on a sphere. The geometry doesn't work out the same way. It makes some really wild things happen. Like my favorite one is all the weird effects you get on a spinning sphere. Like if you shoot a high powered projectile on a spinning sphere, it curves. But it's not really curving. It's just like apparent, like the sphere is moving and the objects that are stuck on the sphere are moving. But that bullet, the way it will interact with that, it makes it look like just like drops straight to the left or straight to the right. And it's these are some wild things that when you see something like that, that's when I think you realize that, you have the wrong axioms. Like, oh crap, I need to, that's like why science is not a good thing for like how to live the good life. As an example, is that science is just a tool, right? It can be wrong in different scenarios.
Sorry, yeah. Well, I was just kind of thinking of like what you were saying, like axiomatic systems. Like how would we use this? I guess that the way you would use axiomatic systems is you kind of have a giant bag of axioms that are available to you,
Right.
things that are established, but they're really just assumptions, right? And then I guess
Yeah.
you is the way that you're kind of thinking of it is like, okay, when I approach a problem, let me pick, these three axioms from my set, and I'm going to use those axioms to solve this problem, and it's going to give me an answer that's consistent with those axioms. So either I have to give up those axioms or I give up the answer that I came to. Is that kind of what you're thinking in terms of like a system as we come up with these different axioms that we try to hold true, and you kind of apply them to situations and problems, or and when you use the axioms, you come up with a solution that's like consistent if you want to hold to those axioms over everything else, I guess.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great way to go about it. I mean, there's so many things where you come at them with different axioms and you get, and to be fair too, axioms do not make a complete system, because there's the other thing. I think Aristotle is a good example of this. There's the idea of syllogisms, where you have like, scenarios and then an axiom and then like therefore something else, like given A and B then C, or you have two axioms that when you compose them you get another thing that's not necessarily axiomatic. It's just like, another law or precept or concept, but it's built on those axioms. So I guess those are the ways you can build a more complex system because of knowledge. Because doing things just with axioms, it's like you very quickly run into like very complicated solutions to problems by backing them up with axioms, or a very large set of axioms. I guess those are the two ways. Like if you have a small set, then like your problem solutions are always look really weird because you have to back everything up to this higher order thing, and your abstraction layer is really not great, I guess, as far as when we talk about machine code. Like we're solving everything with machine code or bytecode instead of with Java to the same
exactly
this other layer.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea. I mean, you could definitely, it's not that everything has to be reduced to an axiom that doesn't depend on other things, right? You could have a list of axioms that exist independent of other things, and then you can have new axioms that are a composition of existing ones. Like, oh, when I combine these three things together, we get this new fact, like Noah's always right and Matt's always wrong. Because if you look through it, if you look at A, B, and C, A then B then C, Noah's always right.
Biological essentialism is always wrong. So, and Matt is always about that. Yep.
I do like that. I mean, it's different than like a map, right? Because like a map would be like, here's a node, and you could draw lines between the nodes to say these two are connected. But it would be a system like, if we did an axiomatic system, that's almost either like, okay, you have a fundamental idea that doesn't based on anything, or you have a new idea that is a composition of, the two or three other axioms. But like in a map system, you'd have like a node, and you could say this is related to this. But I think that what's harder in a map system is to determine like that parent-child relationship, I think, to use like inheritance from software engineering. Like when you have an idea that's composed of or derived from another idea, that's harder to see in a map. A map is really just like A to B, like A is mapped to B. Either this is this via mapping, or like this is related to this via mapping.
Yeah, like
go ahead.
There would be ways to maybe like unroll it too, to see like, because the tree system, especially if it's like if it becomes, or a map, if it becomes very nested, then it's, or graphically complex, where you have the parents of like one node. Like let's say driving is bad. Like that's a knowledge system that I came up with, because it's like, oh, there's the top way to die when you're in your 20s and causes obesity and heart disease because you're not moving. That would be a pretty complicated looking tree if I went up to whatever the axioms were, assuming like, the healthy life is a good life. Well, how many steps do I have to take to get to driving is bad? That's probably a lot. It's probably not just one single step, fair. Right?
Yeah. Versus you could say driving is bad, and we can map it to a couple different things that it's related to, but not have to like take it all the way down to axioms. I mean, I think that you could also just say driving is bad. Here's some reasons to believe that. We can't really deconstruct this idea. We're going to accept this as a fact, because that's often what axioms are, right? Axioms aren't unbreakable truths. A lot of times axioms are things that we have accepted as fact for the case or for the necessity of solving a problem, right? Like, and you can think about this within like a physical engineering system, right? Like if I say, okay, I'm going to assume that this bridge doesn't buckle under the weight of this car.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just pick materials and bolts that are so huge that it won't buckle. And then you might be
Right.
able to like calculate the vibrations or something.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's like you can try to say, okay, we have an axiom here. I guess my point is like, you can try to say our axiom is it won't bend. And then in order to ensure it won't bend, I'm going to make it out of tungsten and make it like 30 feet thick tungsten rods where it's like effectively not going to bend.
Right.
And if you want to like do some other calculations that become easier when you don't have a bending member in your bridge, like that helps you you actually come up with a helpful solution.
Mm-hmm.
So like, yeah, I mean, yeah, even though the assumption might not always hold true,
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of like structure your in the case of these where they're like these are ideas that you're basing things on, you could place your conversation in a certain topic where the axioms hold true, like where air resistance is negligible, you know,
Mm-hmm.
for example.
Spherical cow, my favorite.
Yeah, when the cow, there is times where the cow really is spherical for the sake of argument.
Yeah.
Um,
There's physics is such a great example. Like even if you do entry level physics classes of like, oh my goodness, there's so much complexity of this problem, and we're gonna toss 90% of it out. And in certain cases, it matters. Like if you're trying to build like a Formula One car and you ignore air resistance, then you're like a total idiot. Like you're gonna build this car that doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're rolling a block down a ramp that's going like 10 miles an hour or whatever it is at its max speed because it's such a small ramp, okay, who cares? Air resistance, like you're gonna get a slightly different answer than what actually happens because you didn't include air resistance. But you don't need to scare all the people away in high school with partial differential equations and all this crazy stuff just to be right. And I think that could be another, I think there's really like two ways to slice the type of knowledge that we could care about. It's like, does this matter? Like knowledge that's like relevant to or makes a difference to the scenario. Like those axioms could exist, but does this actually make a difference? And then it could also, I feel like the other direction to care about is like who benefits. That's maybe getting to like computational ethics or religious, benefits, religious systems where you can have an axiom that's like all people are sacred or all people are good.
Yeah.
Or all people are divine if you're, taking something out of like the Christian or other biblical traditions. You get to, those are great concepts, but then you can run into problems where you're like, oh crap, like the trolley problem. All people are divine. Do you kill one person or 5 people?
You don't kill any of them. You don't act.
Right. You do not. That's an answer. That's a very Christian answer, right? Is like by not pulling the lever or pushing the man onto the lever or whatever it is, you do nothing, which means that you do not directly cause the death or harm of a sacred being under your axiomatic systems. Whereas maybe if you're a computational ethicist, you're like, oh, I'm going to save the most people. And you don't really.
Well, it's the do no harm thing too. It's not just religious
divinity.
that are people that believe that. The doctors and medical systems also believe that too.
Hippocratic oath. Yep. It's the same thing. You don't tell people like you're not supposed to tell people if their partner has an STD. Well, I think in certain cases you are supposed to, but in most of the time you're not, because you do harm to the person that you are treating by disclosing that information. So you're the non-acting actor in the trolley problem once again.
So you say those two axes of like, does it matter?
Right.
Does this knowledge matter, and who does this affect?
Yeah.
Or are you kind of picturing like the axiomatic system where they're just nodes that are kind of floating out there to be used, but they're just placed on like a grid system almost, like
that might be it.
A two axis thing.
Or you could be 3D where like the one of the axes you move through is like, that does this matter, and you like don't even worry about those things because they're off in the distance, like they're air resistance and all that. I don't even need those axioms, but maybe they're part of the same thing, which is like who this line that represents like the beneficiary or whatever it helps you
I do
on.
think you could like almost filter using kind of the thing you're saying, where it's like I have axioms.
Right.
The axioms are keyworded, basically, and then when you put in some keywords, you filter out some things that in this case or this situation,
Yeah.
the axioms don't matter.
Keywords would
Certain
be better
axioms
than
aren't.
dimensional as far as visualizing it. Might be hard to see.
Yeah, I have done that before. My friend and I put together a tool that builds League of Legends team comps. So each champion has certain traits, and then they have synergies and they have anti synergies. You could almost do this with axioms, because you could say like this axiom applies to human motivation, or applies to motivation, but then you could say this idea like synergizes well with like religious systems, but it as anti synergy with like science or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you could say like, okay, if we're going to be talking about scientific fact
Creationism
versus like experiential stuff, or like emotional things, or those, like, you might filter out some things if they're just like purely in the realm of science and not in the realm of like psychology. Like, I don't want to say psychology is not science, but
softer science. You're dealing with a much more complex system than a.
I think the thing I like to think about psychology is it's a black box science. It's a
lot of the time, yes.
Versus like it's not a atomic science, like a thing that's like, we don't start with the smallest thing and work out. We start from a very complex system looking in,
right,
from the outside.
But
like
the neural imaging stuff has gotten really advanced, but it's still, I mean,
but it's in the direction of like we understand this human experience. Let's start to like explain that and find some consistency, assuming we don't actually know what's happening inside a human's brain.
Right.
Like, we don't actually know the exact explanation, so it's too complicated.
We don't have the position, the rate of fire, or if it fired of every single neuron in some part of the brain.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, I do like that. I like also the idea that like the axioms is kind of this like soup, like this 3 or X dimensional soup,
primordial soup,
that from a visualization thing, because that was something I saw you put in your notes here, like what is the value, then what makes this unique from other systems. And I do think that like what I would say that it makes it unique is, other than having a visual representation, I think like it's something that you should be able to, as you try to add new things to it, you should be able to look over at a high level over what we already know and see, does this challenge or contradict any other ideas we have? This could come into the anti-synergy versus synergy thing. You could have like 2 axioms that we can't break down either of these ideas, and we think that they both hold true, but they're in direct contradiction with one another or something, or maybe like partial contradiction with one another. So there's probably some like intersection of the 2 that's like useful. Right. But I guess you could kind of like, if you had this sort of filtering mechanism, like you could, start to have conversations just around like, all right, we come up with one podcast. We say like, okay, here's some idea from religion or science or, ethics or something. And let's like challenge this idea. And then we're gonna have another idea. And then we'll like try to use our filter thing and be like, oh, hey, like this is actually seems pretty related to this other topic we talked about. So then we have a new conversation comparing the 2 things, from maybe one thing from religion, one thing from ethics, and one thing from science or biology, and like try to really break down like, can we get rid of one of these axioms now? Does one of them not hold true, or is it like just conditionally not true? Like we have to make an addendum to it. Yeah,
then that's when it probably stops being an axiom, right? It's like there's some axiom that leads into it that has to, like, this is the case, something. So I'm trying to think of a good example off the top of my head.
I'm actually thinking that like underlying, like maybe we figure out some visual representation for this, but the more we talk about this, the more I feel like software development is like, we could use software to define, like, it's so weird to think about, but it's like, if the axiom is like the function of the code, but the relational mapping, the relational, like how everything relates to, does fit super well into something like, interfaces and inheritance and composition. And I'm like using all these terminology from software that I'm like, you could make like class files that do nothing, but they do have a relationship. They have relationships. Like you could take
Right.
the method off of one and use it in the other for an example. Like that actually has the level of like nuance. That has like the level of granularity you'd need to be able to relate all these systems. And you probably could find, there probably exists out there some software visualization tools that let you visualize a code base and all of its like dependency mapping.
Yeah.
And that would actually be the map of the stuff we come up with. And I think that would be really cool if that like I think I mentioned this before, where it's like it would be really cool if that's something that you could visualize. And then when you click on the little nodes, like it takes you to the podcast that talks about the topic. It's almost like if you find, oh, hey, like I stumbled on this thing because I was actually thinking about this and was wondering what people thought about it. And then you might find our website, or you might find this podcast takes you to the website. And then on the website, it's like more of a visualization. Like you see that's like a node in a giant system. And you click on that node and then it like pulls out all the other things. We're like, oh, hey, this little part of this idea is used over here. And this little part of that idea, it's spaghetti code, but it's like reality.
Spaghetti. Well, because to me, you're not describing, this reminds me of a UML diagram. I think universal machine language, like basically a class file and then like its properties and methods. Like I had one pulled up just so I keep myself honest on what they look like. But in that, I think that basically has it. And then the relationship is not a map. It's a like a class inheritance or usage hierarchy. Like, oh, this inherits from this, or this uses this as like a member to do something. Yeah, that's totally a valid way to. I wonder if there would be a nice. I think UML diagrams can be kind of ugly. They're just boxes and lines, but.
Well, I was thinking you could even just write pseudocode. Like the methods don't have to do anything because functionally speaking, they would just be like ideas and thoughts and comments. But you can still like, from an inheritance perspective, like use the code, and we just like write in real code, and then use something that visualizes the code dependencies.
Well, I mean, maybe this be more comment based, but like I would think too that like I think of knowledge and behavior as a cycle, and they influence each other. Obviously, right? You do things that brings you knowledge, or it reinforces your knowledge that exists, or it changes your knowledge, like, oh, something didn't happen that I expected to. And so I feel like what a real knowledge system has is it has the concept of, given these things, what the behavior should be, or what you expect the behavior would be with your knowledge system. So like, given the trolley problem, what would you expect that you should do? Or, there's a billion other things that you could consider knowledge. Like, given that you come across an ant, what should you do? Should you kill it? Should you not kill it? Like, those are all.
Oh yeah, that's good. I guess you could kind of come down to. I mean, this comes to the keyword stuff that we're talking about too, where it's like murder. It's a keyword.
Murder, keyword. And murder is always like, makes sense, right? For societal reasons, it's always taboo. Like, you're not supposed to kill people, but it's very clear. If you're Genghis Khan, or if you're
it has anti-synergy.
Yeah.
Or no, murder has synergy with self-preservation.
For sure. Yeah.
Right.
Something comes upon you.
Synergy with like the divine soul or the divine individual or something.
Yeah, in society, right? If everyone in society, or one in society, if they're all murdering each other, it's basically the breakdown of that society. Whereas across societies, it's actually probably a necessity, like you said, for survival. Like, if you don't kill that tribe, they will kill you.
There are some pretty interesting tools I have built on that, like keyword analysis too, because the way that we used it for a team of League of Legends, you had 5 champions. So the champions had different keywords like long range initiation, or like, so they engage fights from like really far away. And then you have champions that have long range assist. So the long range initiation champions would synergize with long range assist. And what we would do is we would take, like, we had each champion had like 20 to 30 keywords, like a lot. And then what we would do is we would do a pairwise analysis. So on a team of 5 champions, we'd take every combination of 2 champions in the team of 5, and we would calculate their synergy score. And then we would come up with the group of 5 characters that had the best synergy scores. And that would kind of be like an ideal team to play. But the idea was kind of bringing back here is, if you took like that, you stripped away the word champion and put in the word idea, like, or concept or axiom, you could come up with like, hey, let's come up with a list of 5 axioms that have like really high synergy scores. as long as we populate the keywords and populate enough keyword, it's almost like Fermi approximation is kind of how I looked at when I did this on the champions. It was like, well, the more data I put in here for every single character, the more I factor in that data, the more my overestimations will balance out my underestimations. So like if you did this for ideas or axioms, you could say like, well, the more keywords you attribute to an axiom and the more synergies and anti-synergies it has, then when you kind of calculate a synergy score, quote unquote, to see like, hey, these 4 ideas seem super related according to our analysis, like it's a good discussion topic. And it's like, it's probably going to come up with some pretty profound like connections, I would think. At least like I will say that thing we did for League of Legends, like we came up with like a not insignificant number of like compositions for teams that like the professional teams didn't use until like 2 years later. And it didn't even seem like it was related to the meta or anything. It was just like they just didn't even think to make that combination, probably because we put like countless hours into doing this like analysis and stuff that they're just kind of like mostly coming to intuitively.
What was the
sorry, that was a lot, but
no but what was the implementation like? Was it like, so I've seen people use like spreadsheets for things like this, which you can scoff at.
We put all the keywords into
all the kiwis
a spreadsheet, but then we exported the CSV and did the synergy analysis in Python.
Oh yeah, there we go. The language of machine learning or decision making too. I mean, that was another thought is, what if we built a knowledge system and then it's like a trained model and it's like, oh, what am I supposed to do in this scenario? And you're like, oh, kill them or save them or something. 90% kill.
I would think we should definitely do it. Save. I think it's just, if nothing else, for laughs and stuff.
Yeah. Oh.
Like I remember we had that idea of like doing an AI themed podcast with an AI co-host. And like I think that would be really fun to do. Wild. Bring back that idea, but do it with like this sort of ethics sort of discussion. Like, hey, we're talking about like we just have like an ethics question for the AI bot every cast, like
have natural language processing, and then I guess like an understanding of enough knowledge or I don't know behavior responses to a scenario. It's like, oh, what would you do in this? And it's like just extrudes some absolute nonsense, which maybe be the early versions of it. But maybe we could get it to actually do something useful. I don't know. Would be fun.
Man, the funny thing is, like, I started with when I built that thing, I started by doing it for Smash Brothers, but it didn't work very well because what I did was I did pairwise analysis of everyone's in the scene's tier lists. So they did a whole bunch. Everyone would make a tier list and say Pikachu's the best, and this character's the best. And then they also had ones out there like a Pikachu player would say, Pikachu loses in a best of 3, they go -2 into this champion or something, or this character. And then so like I loaded all that data in there, but it just basically spat out what is like, well, yeah, the best character in the game is the best character.
It was tautology, yeah.
Yeah, because I was trying to figure out like, oh, if I were to play the 3 characters that have the least losing matchups, it's like, well, play the 3 best characters in the game.
Yeah, I mean,
it just spits you out the thing you already knew. So
that's not as complex.
I will say that the League of Legends thing worked super well because I think it worked well because, there's things like a character brings a wall, like can spawn a wall, which blocks off people's ability.
Another character can do some damage or do something else while that's happening, right?
There's another character that can push you back, and if you collide with a wall, you get stunned.
Yeah, so perfect combo.
So we
combo.
had the like terrain creation versus like terrain interaction keywords.
Yep.
So I mean, it really comes down to like, I think how good we can extract keywords. The more nuanced we can get with keywords and synergies and anti-synergies, the better the analysis will work. The thing it'll do though is it'll process a large amount of data. Like if you have 50 keywords for every axiom or something, like good luck trying to associate that within a list of 100 axioms. Like
probably needs lower cardinality.
That's we're good at addressing patterns or seeing patterns, but I think that at some point, like putting your pattern recognition system into code is going to be like really helpful too.
Yeah. I do like I feel like part of the benefit of I think the best or most successful systems actually have a small set of axioms or a pretty narrow set. That's what makes them so powerful. Like the more things you have to assume, the more dangerous like things that I think like the fewer steps you have to take from, or maybe I should phrase this right. Like if you basically are just one step away from belief or fantasy, or like, you know, you have nothing to back it, you don't have other examples, you're just like, oh, it has to be this. I think that's when systems aren't as powerful or more dangerous.
I would say the more axioms you have, the less likely that there truly isn't some like contradictions taking place here. Like if you combine 2 or 3 axioms and that's your only basis, like they might not be, you know, it's hard to hold all those things true at once. Might be hard to hold everything true.
Right.
I think that was more of what I was seeing you'd get out of this pairwise analysis would be like, you would probably, what it would do is it would spit out things that are either, we could have it spit out things that are contradictory. Like here's a list of the most contradictory ideas. Like here's the list of the most, and then you could spit out things like here's the list of the most, like, yeah, the most complementary ideas, the ones that are fitting together really well. And then you could probably, what I would think we would do is then take that set and be like, this is a good discussion topic. Like we should talk about this and do some research. And then you could plug it in. You could kind of coalesce them into a new axiom, or you could make a new axiom that's like, okay, here's the third missing axiom that either aligns these 2 ideas or proves that you can't hold both of them and we have to choose one or the other. Like, and this biases us towards one. Something I was thinking about for the implementation that'd be cool is like, you could do the pairwise analysis thing. And if you did it instead of in a spreadsheet in a CSV, like each axiom was like an instance of a class, like, or like a child of a class or something like that. Like we did like an axiom object. And then so they have like properties like keywords and synergies and anti-synergies, or maybe we can come up with better words. That works for League of Legends when you're building a team with characters, but like with ideas, it's probably more like complementary, contradictory. Like I guess if we have the list of keywords and then you have like those keywords appear under like contradicts this keyword. I don't know. Maybe contradicts isn't a great word either because it's probably not going to be. Yeah.
If I think of like good and evil. I also, the thing that worries me about this approach is, I think I talked about relevance, where systems that just completely don't care about each other, like a good example might be air resistance again, right? It's like, how many axioms from religion care about air resistance? Probably 0, because that's not, religion has no concern over like how projectiles move or how objects move in 3-dimensional space. Maybe, well, unless it's like, oh, you know, geocentric versus heliocentric models. But I mean, I think that stuff's kind of silly.
I think what would happen in that case is they would be like low synergy scores. They wouldn't be contradictory. They wouldn't be synergistic.
It'd just be like 0 or 0.1.
They're like 0.
This doesn't really matter for this scenario.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's true of all sorts of knowledge we have, right? Like you go to cook dinner, it's like, does it matter, you know, what Moses said to the Israelites? No, it doesn't matter unless you're like having a Seder, then it probably does matter.
What I do like about this idea is like you can be as silly and stupid and irrelevant as you want with your ideas or axioms as long as you have good keywords.
Right.
So if I'm like, don't eat spaghetti after 8 o'clock, that could be like an idea that I'm like, I just had this idea or this axiom. But I'm going to be like, it's related to like food, what you shouldn't eat, what you should eat, or whatever. Well, I guess like, yeah, it's like eating, and then like your keyword could boil. I guess the keywords have to exist at a level that is axiomatic.
Yeah, the categories are axiomatic too, I guess, right?
Yeah, because they're like, it'd have to be in that example of don't eat spaghetti after 8 p.m. It's like
diet or health.
The keyword would have to be like, yeah, you could have diet in there as a keyword, but then you could have be there like as the keyword. The keyword's the hard part here. The keyword is like the essence of the idea, which is like when you eat something, like, or something like that. Like what is that? Would be like
the archetype, the category, something that is not even metaphorical, but just archetypal. Like it represents the higher system or the more abstract system. That it could also be curated. Like you wouldn't necessarily have to define the keywords. You could just extract them from the system. The problem is that people might use, like if you and I do this, use different keywords for but we mean the same thing. And then there probably need to be some way to coalesce. So like keyword synonyms or something like that, keyword relatedness.
Maybe the keywords,
Silly.
maybe like the objects have keywords, but also the objects are keywords. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so they're first class. So you can use a keyword that is diet, but then that's also that's an item, like a category of knowledge is a diet.
Yeah, because then you can get more. You could add in, because then we could just basically pull the whole list of like instantiated classes or whatever. I don't know if they'd be they would not be objects. These would actually need to be like class definitions if we were trying to use dependency like analysis to like relate them to.
Right. Yeah.
But this is the dependency analysis then, because it has the thing. It has a dependency on that keyword.
Yep.
So it actually literally import that class.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. They would have to be like an enum or a object and not just a string. If there were strings, then there's no dependency that's explicit anywhere.
Well, even not like just in, I'm thinking it's not even just an enum. I'm thinking like, we have the base class that's like axiom, right? I think it is axiom, and then we don't have keywords, we have axioms. Like axioms have axioms. So either the axiom has no axioms or it has axioms. But then it has like
axiom, and you got your axiom and my axiom, and now we're just using the word, beating the word to death.
Gosh.
Maybe
I might have to think about this more, because it's like I am trying to visualize, because I do like this model of like pairwise analysis, because I think what I'm trying to get out of this, which I think is like the main value that's cool, is that there's often times where like you really truthfully believe something in one context, and then you go into another topic that's in a different like domain, and you just completely throw out the axioms that you like really firmly hold in one conversation. Like you could be like, this happens all the time in politics, or like
pro-life
in one
but not really
pro-life, but also what's the death penalty,
right? Capital punishment, or and then
like, the sanctity of life, but then also like capital punishment, let's kill people.
And then also like support the poor, but the other side, support the poor but also kill all your children kind of thing. Like that's the other dark way of looking at it.
Because I think that would be the main interesting thing to pull out, because I can come up with examples like that, but if there's plenty of people out there that hold both of those contradictory views. So what's helpful for me is not to point out the things that I already know to be contradictory, but it'd be helpful to point out the things that I don't really think are contradicting, in my own set of axioms and ideas.
Right.
Okay. I think we're getting on like coming up on an hour here, and I think we've got like a good basis. Do you think this is like something, because I think you had it in your notes here, is like, is this something we should do? And that's a good maybe thing to wrap up on.
Yeah. No, I think it'd be pretty interesting, especially if it'd be cool if you could get a decent visual. I think like a decent visual, or I would love to have like you ask it like, hey, knowledge system, should I marry this person, or something stupid like that?
Yeah.
Or, like, should Ross and Rachel get together on Friends? Like, has that level of understanding built into it or not? That would be pretty.
I'd love that, because especially as we're like building it up and it gives really stupid answers, that would just be a good for comedic effect too.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if nothing else, this could spit out topics for us to discuss. I think is like, hey, the system seems to think this is contradictory. It should be like discuss that. I think is like the main cool thing.
Yeah, if it gave a contradictory score to every concept, it's like, oh well, these axioms say this and those axioms say that. It doesn't make any sense.
I guess what you'd have to do is maybe like you do like, okay, we have an idea, and then it's like, these things have to be true, and then these things could be true, and these things can't be true. Like, right? Like we could do that sort of axiom thing. I guess the hard part is like, it's really like, it's coming up with that list of keywords is going to be the tough part.
Definitely.
The keywords have to be like general enough that they're applicable like across topics, but then they also have to be like specific enough that you can tie them to other points that say the same thing. Because if you say it actually it has to be general enough that you can tie it to different things that are saying the same thing.
Right.
It has to be specific enough that it actually applies, I guess.
Yeah, that's that affinity I think you're talking about, or relatability or whatever it is to the topic. Like, oh, does air resistance matter for should Ross and Rachel get together? Probably 0. Doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
relevance. It could be like a relevance section.
Yeah.
Well, I think that maybe we could do a this axiom must be true, this axiom can't be true, because that might be something that we don't populate until later, until like we have more discussions, and then we come to a conclusion like actually these two things are like you can't hold those two ideas.
They're
it would be cool also if like that linked to a video where we talked about that. That's I think that I like that too, or like the podcast. I do like the whole thing where it's like that where everything's hyperlinked, it's like deeply hyperlinked, so it's like every time, kind of like the Wikipedia of knowledge, where it's like, oh yeah, you can't believe this and that, and you click to it through and it's like our video talking about why you can't hold the two things together,
right?
Even if like, oh yeah, it'd be cool if like you do on the YouTube thing, it's got like the chapters in it.
Oh, the little sections, the little segments.
Yeah, so if we like come down to that, then like we can chapter that out. It would be, we didn't have to full chapter the whole video. I think it's just like, oh hey, this video we established this concept for our for our map, and then or the tree or whatever we're calling it, and then we just chapter that one section of the video. That like, this is the part where we actually do something that changes the map, and then we go in and change it. And it'd be cool if we changed it live too. I could like share my screen or something and do the text edit, even change the source code.
That would be cool. Definitely.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. I hope this was an interesting discussion. I think it's very very abstract right now. Hopefully it'll get more concrete in the next couple of videos. Maybe we'll like our next couple casts will start to flesh out some of these ideas and start putting them to the test and start populating the keywords, as they say, populating the apps.
I don't think anyone says it.
As we say.
Yeah, as you said.
As I said.
Maybe I'll say it too. I'm just kidding.
All right, cool.